Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
Joining us now, ESPN's Kalyn Kahler, investigative reporter, who, Kalyn, I don't know if you know this, but you've basically been on the show as often as I have over the last month. I missed a bunch of time, and every time I'm back, it's like, oh, you and Don Van Natta dropped another story about the NFLPA, so welcome back to the show.
Yeah, I feel like it's been weekly at this point, Craig.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, which is basically all I've been on the show. But don't worry, everybody. I'm here all week, so we'll see what damage Kalyn and Don can do this week. The newest chapter in this saga is, if you will, is that David White has now been elected the interim executive director of the NFLPA. Obviously, you and Don have been reporting about the demise of Lloyd Howell, the now departed, resigned director of the NFLPA. When the election of Howell happened a couple of years ago, White was the other candidate. So how did they land on going back to him to be the interim?
Yeah, so we were unable to confirm how many candidates they had for interim director, as well as exactly who they were. They've been the player representatives and union leadership has been very buttoned up about this process. They really have tried their best to stay quiet about it. So we have ideas on, who was between, but we don't know for sure. And we reported on a document a little over a week ago that a union lawyer had put together recommending a few candidates. And there were, I believe, 3 union staffers, Don Davis, Terry Smith, and Lester Archambault, and then 2 outsiders, Dominique Foxworth and Eric Winston, who were recommended by this union staffer to be considered for the interim candidate. Now, that was not an official list of all the interim candidates, so we don't know for sure, but we do know that over the last couple of weeks, the Board of Representatives and the Executive Committee interviewed all of whoever they considered to be candidates. They were all interviewed, and they went through pretty lengthy background checks because it took a couple weeks to get to this point. And I talked to several player reps at training camps who told me they had been in hours and hours of meetings. The Cowboys player rep, Trent Sieg, their long snapper, he said the first 2 days of training camp, he was in 8 hours of meetings, which is a lot considering that they're also at training camp right now. So they were doing their best to get to a quick answer here, but not rush the process either. So they have come back to David White, who they elected last night and who, as you mentioned, was the other finalist when they elected Lloyd. It came down to David White and Lloyd Howell. Those are the only 2 candidates who were brought to and presented to the Board of Representatives in Virginia in 2023 when they had a 2-day election process. And those were the only 2 guys. And so what's interesting that they came back to David White is the fact that J.C. Tretter has said publicly, and there's a couple other union sources. I remember Washington Post story had a couple sources who backed up J.C. on this, that the Executive Committee in 2023, when they conducted an informal poll of what their preference was ahead of the election, the Executive Committee came down in favor of White over Howell 10-1, apparently, per Tretter and a couple other sources. So this is the guy who, on paper, the last time around as well, looked like a more natural candidate for the job. He led the SAG-AFTRA giant Screen Actors Guild Actors Union in Hollywood. Huge union. Really, that's a really big labor job. And he also played football at Division III college. He was a quarterback at a Division III college in Grinnell, Iowa, I believe. So he's got a little bit of a football playing background, not an NFL background, but he knows the sport, was an athlete, and has a ton of experience leading one of the biggest unions in the country. So on paper, he looks a lot more, objectively qualified for the job with experience that lines up to be leading a labor union than Lloyd Howell ever did.
Grinnell College, by the way, a somewhat infamous school because they were the school, people might remember this. This is the only association I have with Grinnell College at all that was shooting an absolutely absurd amount of 3-pointers. And like they had some guy score like 120 points in a game, I think, a couple years ago. So I didn't think today would be the day that we'd have our random Grinnell College fact, but there you go. That David White goes to Grinnell. Apparently he was a Rhodes Scholar. Just searched David White, Grinnell College. And there you go. 1989 football roster. There you go in the archives, right there on Google, kids. Go look it up or don't. What are the chances that David White becomes the permanent executive director, and this is a delayed, not denied type of job for him? Or is he taking this on the interim basis with the knowledge that they are going to do a full search and land on somebody else?
They haven't explained a lot of details, specifics about how they're going to conduct the permanent search. What we know from the statement they sent out last night from Jalen Reeves-Maybin is that, they are, what did he say here? I'm looking it up. He said, this is a player-led process. Soon we will commence a thorough search process for a permanent executive director. The process will continue to be player-led, as the strength of our union has and always will lie with our membership. So we don't know what that process is going to look like, because obviously the last process they conducted was much more secretive, much more confidential than any prior processes have been. And it didn't net them a successful result. So I know that the player membership, the Board of Representatives, has been having a lot of conversations about how do they want to run the next process. And a lot of the executive committee has really dug their heels in and defended the last election process, which is, the Board of Representatives voted ahead of that election process to change the timeline so that they would not have 2 weeks to know who the candidates were, who the finalists were, and do research, ask questions, and talk to people, and the media would find out. They changed it so that the player representatives wouldn't find out until the actual meeting where they were supposed to vote. And I know that the executive committee members of the executive committee have said publicly, Austin Eckler comes to mind, who did a long interview with The Athletic where he really defended that process. And I've talked to some player reps who also thought it was a good process, because remember, they voted for it. Like, they voted to support protecting the candidates and not letting their information leak to the media. And they thought that was the best choice. And so it'll be interesting to see if the process for them changes, if they go back to how it used to be, where the Board of Player Representatives are getting a longer lead time on the finalists. It'll be interesting to see if they use a different search firm, or if they don't use a search firm at all, because they used Russell Reynolds last time around. And, I've talked to people involved in the process who don't have anything bad to say about Russell Reynolds necessarily. So they did a thorough job. But, obviously, as I said before, like, we know the results of the last process wasn't good. So it'll be interesting to see if they use a different search firm, if they use no search firm, if they change it back to the longer lead time. I don't have a ton of details right now on where they're going to go with that, because they've been really buttoned up about it. But I will say, from talking to a few player reps at training camp, one thing that has come up is 2 or 3 of them expressed to me that they feel they should have known about the collusion grievance decision. They thought there was really interesting and important information in that collusion grievance decision that all players should have known about. And the Rams player representative, Quentin Lake, told me that they've been having conversations as a group recently about how can the player representatives be more involved and more informed in what's going on. And obviously they don't need to know. They're like, yeah, we don't need to know about every little grievance. Like, that's why we have elected an executive committee, because they filter things for us. But in a situation like that collusion grievance, there is frustration among the player reps about not knowing about that and not being informed on that. So one of the things they have been talking about recently is how can the player representatives be more in the know and more informed?
That's really interesting. Kalyn Kahler is with us, ESPN national NFL reporter. Of course, she and Don Van Natta have been reporting on all that is going on at the NFLPA over the last couple of weeks and months. And like they they both seem to understand why transparency is important and hate it with every fiber of their being, depending on whether they are the ones being told or they're the ones hiding the information. So like when you talk to, you mentioned a couple, and Austin being one of them, the interview he did with The Athletic about this, but when you talk to players writ large about this stuff, Kalyn, and the secretive nature of their process, and is this something that they like wholeheartedly believe and defend, or are there others that are like, this is stupid. Like, why are we making this? Like, we're not protecting state secrets. Like, we need to make sure that we have what we need. And if that means it gets out to the media, like, who cares? Or is there something in the past that makes this so painful that it turned into a circus and they just feel the need that that is more damaging than whatever happened this time or could happen again?
Yeah, I have not talked to anyone who says that, they disagreed with the process. All of these guys are really repeating the same party line, which is, well, if we want to get the best candidates, if we want the best candidates to apply for this job, we have to promise them confidentiality. So that seems to be the, prevailing thought here. And even after what happened with Lloyd, I still keep hearing that. So there hasn't been a lot of, we should definitely do things differently because it didn't work this time. Like, everyone seems to just think that they ran a good process, even though, despite the results, the players that I've talked to believe that they ran a good process, and that's from the executive committee to the player representatives. And
so can I just jump in and then ask the obvious follow-up to which you may not have an answer and you might be asking people? It's like, where did they go wrong then? Because like clearly the process didn't work. So like where, if that part of the process was correct, then like what got so messed up?
Yeah. So I asked that question I had a chance to talk to Josh Harris, the Chargers player representative, who did vote for Lloyd Howell. He was at the election. He's been a player rep for 11 seasons, I believe. So a very long time. He's in his 14th season as a long snapper in the NFL. And he said right now, he's like, yeah, well, what we do as players is what do? We watch film, we review the tape, we look for mistakes. So that's what we're doing now. And I'm like, okay, well, what has your film review told you? Same question you just brought up. And he said, what he's learned is that there is no perfect election process. He thinks that they ran a solid process, but he's like, clearly this has shown us there isn't a perfect process. And I think what I've heard too is like something that players bring up is like right now the trust in the union is not good, obviously, after what's happened, and players feeling like they were not informed when they should have been informed. And so I think a topic that's come up among the player reps I've talked to is just like they need to regain the trust of players. And something Ted Karras told our Bengals reporter Ben Beebe, I thought it was a really interesting quote. Ben asked him, okay, well, what are you looking for in the next interim director given what happened with Lloyd? And Karras kind of like hemmed and hawed at first. He was like, well, and then finally he says, anyone in a leadership role within our union needs to live above reproach. So I think that sort of distills what they've learned in a nutshell. Is like Josh Harris told me he felt like he had enough information in the election, despite only knowing who Lloyd was for about 24 hours before he voted for him. He felt like he had enough information to make an educated vote. He said that wasn't the problem. And he knew about a lot of the red flags that Don and I reported on in Lloyd's past, such as the sexual discrimination and retaliation lawsuit. Harris says that the players grilled Lloyd about that, and they knew about what was at the time an ongoing civil lawsuit with the whistleblower financial fraud allegations against Booz Allen, where Lloyd had been the CFO. Harris said they knew about that as well. And he said, it's been 2 years, so I don't remember specifically what Lloyd Howell told us that made us feel comfortable voting for him, but he said whatever his answers were, when we asked him questions about those situations, they were not the type of answers that would lead you down the path to think something like this would ever happen, is what he told me. So, I'm not really answering your question because honestly, none of the players have really answered the question in a satisfying way, I don't think. But I think if there's anything that they can learn is, as what Ted Karras said, whoever is in a leadership role in this union needs to be above reproach. So shouldn't be getting sued for these types of things in their past.
Yeah, it just, some of the quotes considering the process, I just am like, do you guys hear yourselves? Like what you're saying and what actually happened does not seem to add up. So I guess the other question I would have then, Kalyn, are there other people in the union staff wise that come from other industries or have other backgrounds that, like, I'm not trying to say like football players are dumb, because they are not. Like, football players, many NFL players are brilliant, and have wide swaths of experience outside of the NFL. These guys own businesses, they have other interests, they do other stuff. So it's not like they don't know how to function as people in a boardroom, but their time is committed to a very strenuous job that has nothing to do with like vetting people. And they don't always, I think part of being in a locker room sometimes is the ability to look past stuff and see the best in people so that you can work together. And the way you have to do that in a locker room is very different psychologically than the skills you'd have to apply to elect a union director. So are there other people that help them, or are they, because I'm also thinking of the quote here that probably means the answer is no, where it's like the strength of the union is in the membership. But are there people to help the membership and maybe help along even within the process that's been established?
Yeah, there are, because there are still, Lloyd, when he became the union director, he offered buyouts to a lot of union staffers, and a lot of them took it. So I think there are about 35 longtime union employees who ended up leaving. So they do have some vacancies in important positions at the union, but they were trying to become, as the players have told me, more efficient with their staffing. So there are people within the union that can help the players with this. And some of those people are the executive committee, because, in my conversations with the player representatives, as they were saying, well, we want to be more involved. We want things to be more transparent. We want to know more. Like, we should have known about this collusion grievance. As they're expressing that, at the same time, most of them are also admitting, well, we can't know, like, we don't have the bandwidth to know about everything that's going on at all times. So that's why, the Board of Representatives elects an executive committee. So, and the executive committee is 9 players plus the president. So those 10 players, those guys are the filter to the player representatives. That's how they are supposed to be functioning. So it's hard, even the when you talk to them, they're like back and forth between, yeah, we want to know more, but then we also don't want to know more, because we understand at a certain point it's going to be too much information. And, a lot of player representatives have been talking at training camps over the last couple of weeks, and I don't remember who it was now, because I've been trying to collect, like, with our different ESPN reporters, as they talk to people, they'll send it to me so I can just look it over. And one of the representatives was saying, something along the lines of, like, yeah, too much information is too much information. Like, at a certain point, if I send out texts to all my teammates about union ongoings, like, people stop responding. Like, people will start ignoring it when you're giving them so many, like, daily updates. So I do think that is the ultimate challenge for the players union, is like, how much should the players be involved? How much should they know? How much do they deserve to know? How much is too much? And then how do you get them? I mean, the age-old problem for this union is, how do you get the players invested when, in something that's really a 10-year problem, which is the CBA, when their careers are an average of 3 years? Like, that is the hardest challenge that the PA faces, is just getting the investment from players who have the long-term investment, realizing that their involvement is going to help people down the road. It may help them as well, but the majority of them have short careers. So it's going to be helping the players after them for them to be involved and invested. So I think, yeah, it's a really good question that you bring up, and I don't think it really has an easy answer.
Yeah, I mean, part of the solution might be, I learned in this interview how many long snappers are player reps. Those guys are around forever.
Oh my God. They're hard. Yeah.
Yeah. Elect all the long snappers. There, we solved the problem, Kalyn. Why don't they ask us?
Yeah. I actually asked Josh Harris that. I was like, is there something to the fact that, like, a lot of you guys are specialists? Because Tom Moore said a punter is on the executive committee. Brandon McManus, a kicker, also on the executive committee. And if you scan the list of player reps, as you mentioned, there are a few long snappers on there. There's quite a few. There's at least 3 that I can think of off the top of my head. But yeah, I think it's not a bad idea. Like, get the players. And Josh Harris said, yeah, I think it's probably because we do have long careers, and also because the specialists, kind of interact with everybody on the team, on special teams. As you know, they say that about special teams coordinators too, when they become the head coaches. It's like, oh, well, these are the guys who like literally work with everyone. So they're more qualified to be like representing everyone because they work with everybody. So that was another thing Josh Harris said too, is like, because he kind of interacts with a lot of the teammates, and his job is to be the voice of his own locker room. So that could be part of it.
There we go. That, again, we're just one problem solved. Just ask us. We know what we're doing over here at the Hoffman Show when we show up for work, which we're now going to start doing again. Kalyn Kahler is with us to talk about this NFLPA story. If you want to read more, ESPN.com is where you go. Her and Don Van Natta doing tremendous work there. There will be more chapters in this story as the full search goes on. Some of the grievances that have been appealed, those get resolved. So there's plenty more to come here down the road. Kalyn, appreciate you joining us as always. Great work as always. And I'm sure based off how this is all going, we'll be talking to you again soon.
Thanks so much, Craig.
Hey, this is DA, and you're listening to The Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.